Colleagues, welcome to the seminar Stabilization and Early Reconstruction of Ukraine, Perspectives and Proposals of Ukrainian Civil Society Operating in War. It is actually the meeting of minds of recognized experts in this field, of people who know the situation on the ground very well, and because of this knowledge, they can foresee and even predict something that will happen. I think that most of us, or maybe even all of us, are united in our not only belief, but knowledge that Ukraine shall win in this war, and democracy and people who are for peace, paradoxically, shall win in this war. Because Ukraine's victory means that there's a chance for peace. Any other result or outcome means that there's a real danger of deepening and spreading the war, because the aggressive plans do not end in Ukraine. In this regard, whenever the victory happens, whenever the hostilities are stopped, we have to be prepared to launch in full swing, or to quote another definition, to the full scale, the reconstruction of Ukraine. Of course, this has to be preceded by stabilization. And after a year of war, of full-scale war, marked by the regular military attacks on the civilian infrastructure and the awful war crimes perpetrated by the Russian soldiers during the occupation, there is an urgent need to support the re-establishment of the human security, including on the deoccupied areas. This means enabling the Ukrainian people to not only defend their country, but also to stabilize its social-political institutions, thus providing a ground for a post-war reconstruction and a further democratization. A strong civil society is the key, especially connected to the especially challenging on the deoccupied territories and in other areas strongly impacted by the war. In connection to the war's first year, this horrible commemoration day, with this event, the International Civil Society platform CivilMPlus, or the ongoing civil society efforts for stabilizing and rebuilding Ukraine, and to highlight the wider domestic context in which Ukrainian civil society operates. In this joint call, the Ukraine-based civil society leaders will map the key challenges and provide specific recommendations for the urgent political support and technical assistance, as well as raise awareness about. May I also add that even now, as we speak, a bit early, a bit later, there are different visions of Ukraine's future being published. Just 2 hours ago, I had on my radio show Taras Stetsky, one of the co-authors of the Manifest for Stable Peace, or the Manifest for Lasting Peace, which a group of Ukrainian intellectuals presented at the Munich Security Conference. There are other visions as well. I have no doubt that opinions voiced today and recommendations that we will hear from the esteemed participants in the panel will be a viable alternative or a viable addition to many other plans. And this reflects the nationwide search for the future Ukraine, for Ukraine which will hopefully got rid of the drawbacks that we had in the past. Some technical points. We will spend 1 hour listening to 6 to 5 presentations from our participants, and I implore you to keep your mics shut all the rest when one of the participants speaks. I hope that by the end of this hour, we will have some time to discuss between the panelists what they have heard. And after this round has happened, we'll open the floor for questions from attendees who may write their questions in the chat of this webinar, and I will then read them aloud. If you want to get an answer from a specific participant, please designate so. If not, I will ask any one of the participants who wants and who feels that they should do it to answer. We have qualified simultaneous translator with us, and on the bottom of your Zoom screen, you see a sign of the globe with interpretation under it. So who wants to hear the Ukrainian translation, click on the globe and you'll see there English and Ukrainian, choose Ukrainian as well. Then, because the working languages today are Ukrainian and English. Having said this, I have a pleasure and indeed an honor to invite to the floor or to the mic Vyacheslav Likhachov, who is from the Center for Civil Liberties. And yes, his mic is open, I believe. Please proceed.
Thank you. Good morning, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'll try to be brief, but of course, the range of questions we'll try to discuss today is extremely wide, and in any particular field, we can go much more deeper, which could be important in the future planning the work of international community, the national government, and the Ukrainian civil society on the reconstruction of the country after the full-scale Russian invasion. What I want to say, based on sociological research I was involved in during last half of the year, in the areas which were liberated after different periods of time of the Russian occupation, from Kyiv, Sumy, Chernihiv Oblast to Kharkiv Oblast, Kherson Oblast, and on some areas close to the front line in Zaporizhia Oblast, Donetsk Oblast. So the goal of the research was to have a general understanding of what ordinary people, mostly from small settlements in both rural and urban areas, what needs do they have, how do they feel, what is important for them on the first stage of recovery after the liberation of their territory, and what role the international community could play in this extremely dramatic period for these people and for these territories. Of course, the situation in different regions is different. The situation after a month of the Russian occupation almost a year ago in Chernihiv Oblast is different from the situation of Donetsk or Zaporizhia Oblast, where hostilities are active now. But some points which could be generalized. I try to make, of course, with some attempt of simplification, just to make it like a bullet point, and I'll try to present you now. First of all, one of the important ideas we've understood after this experience of communication with ordinary people is that the best way for the donors, for the international community to reach those people with both urgent humanitarian aid, which will cover their basic living conditions right now, and with some programs and efforts of early recovery on the latest stage. The best way to reach people on the ground is to make partnership, to find the local civil society actors, and sometimes, or even mostly, we talk even not about the established and institutionalized NGOs, but about grassroots volunteer initiatives which appeared during last year, sometimes based on the pre-existing teams, which could be even, I don't know, sport club or whatever, or some groups which appeared around core of 2 or 3 enthusiastic and initiative individuals. But such groups are the most important key actor on the ground, and they have most trust from the population, and they are effective in reaching some difficult place to reach, to understanding the needs of locals in the best way. And what I said is not a kind of obvious thing, because I understand that it is a challenge now, and it will be even more dramatic in the nearest future. The fact that the international donors used to work on the ground through the international humanitarian organizations like Red Cross or something like this, it's just something which was and still is comfortable for them. They understand how does it work, and which is not as effective as partnership with local NGOs and civil society actors. But definitely the last option is the best, to create a network of work with the people on the ground, both in humanitarian aims and in early recovery. Another challenge is that the governmental agencies from their side as well demonstrate a clear intention to monopolize on the international aid from large donors. Saying governmental agencies, I mean all the levels, from the top national government to the local authorities. And now we have fixed dangerous trend of attempts of local authorities to monopolize the volunteer and charity activity, to try to create a control, kind of a control on all the humanitarian activity in their territory. This unhealthy competition between the local authorities and local civil society actors is not constructive in terms of aims of this activity, and it is also the challenge. But the local authorities on the lowest level, on the level of Hromadas or village councils, have much more trust among the local population than the authorities on the middle level, like Rayon or Oblast. And it seems to be the result of the reform of self-government, which appeared to be more or less successful. So those actors, local authorities on the lowest level, and both civil society actors definitely should be the main partner of the international donors who really wants to make changes on the ground in the areas far from large cities, where people suffering not only from the lack of basic living conditions, but from the social economic situation most of all. And it will be my last point. I don't want to violate my time. The social economic needs will be the most important direction of the activity in early recovery efforts after the basic living conditions, after the stage of direct humanitarian aid. And this is war affects all the economical infrastructure dramatically. The people, most of people lost their jobs, and the people of working age maybe are the most vulnerable group, paradoxically, in these areas, because they are not on pension aid, they are more or less young and can work, but they don't have such opportunity, and they are not under the conditions of the most humanitarian organizations who help IDPs, mothers with children, elderly people. So they want work, they need work, they don't have this opportunity, and creation of the working opportunities, creation jobs, support for the local businesses with the programs of infrastructural grant support and so on should be the most important direction of the humanitarian activity on the ground for the international donors who really wants to participate in early recovery after they're satisfying the basic humanitarian needs and the reconstruction of the damaged and destructed infrastructure, road infrastructure, bridges, and so on. I will stop here. Thank you. I will participate in further discussion with pleasure. Over.
The pleasure is going to be all ours. Thank you, Mr. Likhachov, for this concise yet deep and I would say broad-looking presentation. And we now are going to hear from Roman Avramenko from the Truth Hounds.
Thank you, Andriy. Hello, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank to all the participants that have registered to the webinar. I was pleased to see that more than 70 people working for different entities and NGOs taking direct part in rebuilding and development of Ukraine or influencing Ukraine or Ukrainian government has shown the interest in this webinar. So I will try to squeeze my speech in 10 minutes. I will stop on five topics in my presentation. As our organization have been documenting war crimes for 8 years, and we mostly do this in form of field visits. So we frequently travel to the conflict-affected areas, including those areas that were deoccupied. We talk to many people with purpose to collect evidence of international crimes, but of course we notice and record supporting information and the overall context. Well, I'm going to talk about the dense minefields that left after the Russian occupation, about the poverty. I would maybe just briefly touch this theme, as Vyacheslav has already explained it quite a lot. Also, a couple of words about medicine and education, and the post-traumatic syndrome disorders that people are suffering from, and the issue of a collaboration. So the minefields, after vast areas of Kharkiv and Kherson regions that have been under occupation for more than half a year were deoccupied by Ukrainian forces, one of the biggest problems that remained is the dense minefields, not only in the places where the clashes have taken, but in the whole areas, the whole forests and lands are densely covered with anti-personnel and anti-tank mines. And that is something that has to be done in a shorter terms, because people, they can't have access, for instance, to forests to collect woods that they have used to, and therefore they have basically nothing to heat their home with. And the spring is starting very soon, and therefore people wouldn't be able to plow and sow their crops. And you know that these areas, most of the Kherson and also Kharkiv region, are rural areas, and people living there, they feed from the fields. Now they don't have access to them. They even can't graze their cattle there or mow hay. Therefore, and having cattle is for many people is the main source of money. So the demining is the very urgent theme on the occupied territories. I mean, in the fields that are used for the agriculture, the fields has to be checked for absence of mines, and this can be done distantly with the modern digital technologies, with the drones that would just fly over and scan the big territories for the farmers to make sure they can't take their tractors and go out to the fields to plow and sow grains. And also, of course, many teams of deminers has to be deployed to demine the areas of clashes and places that were mined. And the densely mining of the area leads directly to the extreme poverty of the people left there, as they are people of rural areas. They used to feed from the land, and now they don't have access to. So they basically don't have money. They do have some humanitarian aid provided by different international donors, but they don't have actual cash to travel to any place. In many cases, they just can't go to pick their children if they were transferred by Russians, for instance. They told us that we can't afford to ourselves to travel some 300, 400 kilometers to pick up my children, so I'm staying here and having nothing to do. They can't go to the hospital because lack of transportation and because lack of money. Very few people can afford taxi in the areas. So the solution might be launching buses that would travel from settlement to settlement and connect rural distant settlements with the region centers that would allow people to travel for free between the settlements. That would really help. And the medicine and education are in a really poor condition. The many educational facilities has been destroyed or robbed by the occupying powers. A couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, a team of NGOs, they published a report showing the attacks on the medical facilities in Ukraine, and they have counted 707 of the direct attacks on the hospitals and other places of where people can have the medical aid. So this situation has to be done really urgently, because there are no medicine on the places where people live, and they can't access hospitals in the places because lack of transportation and because of bad roads. Also, after half a year of occupation, many people are suffer from trauma that even develop to the post-traumatic syndrome disorders, and that really affects population living there. And just briefly tell that some programs has to be developed and deployed for the distant or in-person psychological support for the people who just lived under the occupation, but most of all for the people who suffered from the shelling, who were kidnapped, tortured by the occupying powers. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases of civilians that have been abducted and subjected to the inhuman treatment and torture. They now been released, and they're in an urgent need of this kind of help to return to the normal life, at least to try to. And the last point is the problem of collaboration. And there are 2 points here. The first point is the people that were trying to help their neighbors to survive were falsely accused of being collaborators and put behind the bars. And the second point is people who actually collaborated with the occupants, provided them information about for instance, people who were speaking Ukrainian or people who served in Ukrainian army for the occupants to come and take them into captivity. They are staying between others. They are not being accused. And that is something that has to be done both on national and regional level. Speaking about the national level, I would say that there is an urgent need to develop kind of law or kind of instructions, guidelines for the people how to behave under the occupation that will align with the international humanitarian law, because the functionaries working on the territories that are occupied by foreign power, they won't get in they won't commit any criminal offense if they would collaborate with the occupiers to ensure people living there they get the all needed for the survival. So they can travel, they can have food, they have the water in the taps, they can have heating, and that is something that is the occupying powers is obliged to provide through the collaboration with the representatives of the communities. And in that case, this kind of collaboration are not seen as a criminal collaboration, let's say. And from the other hand, there is a local communities has to be involved in some kind of public hearings, public talkings about the involvement of other people that have violated Ukrainian law, have betrayed their state, and have collaborated with the occupying powers, providing them information about the I'm not saying about army movement or the setting of armament. I'm saying about they were collaborating, providing them information about someone was serving in the army, someone was having the pro-Ukrainian views. That's why they have to be arrested, and they have been arrested. Now they are walking among the regular people, and this really increases the tension in the societies on the occupied territories.
Mr.
this
Avramenko, you're dangerously close to the time limit.
It's exactly 10 minutes and 15 seconds, and I will stop here. Thank you, Andriy, for reminding me.
Thank you very much. Of course, what Roman was telling us is based very much on the first-hand experience, and his organization does a great deal to collect evidence and to collect testimonies and to find out truth. We've been joined by Denis Bihunov, which is another sign that bodes that the seminar will be a success. But we have another person who is very, very interesting and forward-looking with us, and this is Olena Zakharova from Ideas for Changes. Your 10 minutes start now.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to the international community and civil society. Although the war is still going on and we do not know when it ends, we need to create the vision of the future, the after-war vision, and agree on the principles of the future reconstruction. And I would like to speak about these principles. The good news that this process is already started, and we had several conferences. I mean, Lugano conference and Copenhagen conference, and now we are preparing for the London conference that is scheduled for summer of this year. But the issue is that reconstruction is not, at the moment, it is the issue of the government and international partners. It didn't become the issue of the whole civil society at all tracks. Although there were several conferences that aimed to develop and strengthen these links between civil society and the government, the Ukrainian government still treats this work as their exclusive engagement. The representatives of the Ukrainian civil society even developed Lugano manifesto that was signed by more than 100 NGOs. But this manifesto determines only the general criteria of the reconstruction, and it works on the second track. Unfortunately, we do not see the link to the grassroots level. The local communities are still not a part of this process. That's why it is lack inclusivity. And it is the issue that we should pay attention of our international partners. The second principle is that Ukraine's reconstruction should go hand in hand with their European integration. The EU, along with major international donors, should look at Ukraine as a future EU member state with a respective role in the European community. All reconstruction projects should be linked to the process of European integration of Ukraine. And at the same time, we see Ukraine's victory in this war not just about defeating Russia. It is about ensuring that the country emerges as a successful and prosperous European democracy. And it means that the recovery and reconstruction should be part of a reformation process as well. And the Ukrainian government should commit to the implementation of necessary reforms despite of the ongoing war, and war can't be excuse anymore to stop the reformation process. And economic recovery and successful governments of Ukraine during and after war will only be possible if government pursues economic reforms, de-oligarchization, anti-corruption, and decentralization of decision-making. The next principle that reconstruction should be a part of modernization of the Ukrainian economy. And first of all, we are speaking about Donbas region. We understand that the economy of this region was built on the industrial approach. And the majority of enterprises are ruined, and the economic connections are ruined as well. And we should discuss in the society what key economic model should be developed in this region as well as in Ukraine. In this way, reconstruction should be a part of the modernization of Ukrainian economy, and the same with their ecological approach. Everything that we rebuild should correspond with ecological standards of the European community, and the donors should follow these issues with great attention. The next principle is that reconstruction should prevent that oligarchic business get richer during this process. At the same time, we need to provide the opportunity to the local companies to implement major part of the construction work to inject funds into the economy. So this process should be fair if we speak about the Ukrainian part and the Western part. And the next principle is that the reconstruction should have a human-centered approach. We know that many ruined spaces were created during Soviet times, and they lacked public spaces and comfortable infrastructure, gender, and in general inclusive approach. All these spaces shouldn't be just rebuilt as they were before the war. They should be reinvented upon the new principles. And developing of these principles should be a commitment of the civil society. And we should speak about barrier-free spaces. Because after the war, it will be not only the focus of the gender approach, which whereas active before the war, but we will have a lot of people who suffered during this war and have some physical shortcomings, and we need to provide these people with an inclusive space. And it also should be a part of the reconstruction process. And the last but not the least, but I would say that it is one of the major principles. We need to start thinking about return of our relicants back to Ukraine, to think about the developing of the programs that will help our refugees who are currently in Europe turn to rebuild the country, because it is one of the main assets of our country, and we expect for the help of our European partners in this difficult challenge. It's the main principles that I wanted to mention, and I would be glad to discuss later and answer the question.
Thank you very much, Ms. Zakharova. Your presentation certainly reflected the name of your organization, Ideas for Change. You were full and still are full of ideas for positive change, and have no doubt that together we will find potential to realize them. Now it's time to give the floor to Valeriy Novykov, who represents the Luhansk Human Rights Center Alternatyva. Let's hear whether he offers some alternative to us. Valeriy.
Всім доброго дня. Так, звичайно, мої колеги вже затронули дуже багато
Good
питань.
day to everybody. My colleagues have touched upon many questions, and I will try to add. So if we talk about the situation of reconstruction and rebuilding today, it is hard to call this process of stabilization of the occupied territories as rebuilding. It is impossible today to start any reconstruction and rebuilding because people feel in danger. People don't come back from abroad. Institutions which were ruined and during the invasion and occupation are not functioning, and the rebuilding happens in the ad hoc modus. So we're trying to renew the electricity or water supply, but there is nothing new happening. There is no modernization happening. So there are just punctual renovation, which allows people to more or less start living. But so we have to also distinguish between deoccupied territories like Bucha and Irpin, which are situated next to Kyiv and which were deoccupied since a long time. Another story is Kherson, which is deoccupied, but it's under constant shelling, just like a part of Kharkiv region, like Izum and so on. So the situation in different regions is very different and needs different approaches. In general, Ukraine needs to formulate its own vision for renovation. Should we use old templates, or should we implore modern technologies? Because we will keep on living next to Russian Federation, and we cannot be sure that in 5, 10, 20 years, Russia will not relaunch its aggression. So we need to take these details into consideration, and we need to understand which country we are going to build. Is it going to be a militarized economy? Is it going to be a contemporary economy which is directed to modern technology and technical innovations? So if we are speaking about the challenges or future challenges of stabilizations of occupied territories after the deoccupation, in any case, I would like to sort them, to sort several directions. So first of all, it's ecological issues. My colleagues have mentioned them, but I would like to go into detail. So if you talk about Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast, several in Vuhledar, in Zolote, different mines are now underwater, and then water from these mines is coming to groundwater and coming to the rivers. And the rivers are now impossible. Water is impossible to use because, for example, Siversky Donets, the river is now polluted and you cannot use to be for drinking water, although it is the main source of it. Also, so we have to take care of environmental problems. So also during the time where Ukraine had no control in Luhansk and Donetsk, and this is a period not of 8, it's the period of 9 years by now. We don't know exactly what was happening there ecologically. And now we have to start thinking, what do we do with that? So economical consequences of the war, so not only Azovstal and different metallurgical companies and have been ruined, but also other infrastructural objects are ruined beyond renovation at the moment in these regions. You probably all know how many hospitals and culture and sports have been ruined, and these are huge costs, and it will take a lot of money and a lot of time to rebuild them. And we will have to see what our priorities are there.
We have also to note there will not be a fast rebuilding because we have too less expert, too less human resources and also financial resources in order to rebuild anything. And we also can have a conflicts between the regions when they decide where we need the financial support the most, Avdiivka, Chernihiv, or somewhere other. And then the people will say, yeah, look, these people were supporting Russian Federation, why we should give money them. Let us go to Chernihiv or Kherson or other cities. On the other hand, we see that we need a fast integration of the deoccupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk, and we need a balance between these questions. The next point, Olena just mentioned it, but I want to stress it. We have, until the beginning of the full-scale invasion, we had 2,700,000 disabled people. Now, the number has risen dramatically, and we need also to take that into account. Also, the local government, the experts who were working in the local government in Donetsk and Luhansk, they go abroad, they get another jobs, and they don't come back. Or we want to start a new project, but who will do it? We need to educate people. We need to think about motivation of the people so that they are motivated to come back and to go and work in the local government. We have now military governments in the Donetsk region and the territories that are located near the battle actions, battlefield. Of course, the risk of corruption rises, and we need to think how to react to this. And the last point is also to bringing people into account. So I'm worried about the situation with teachers in the occupied territories. After deoccupation, who will teach children in the schools? Of course, Ukraine will not will not give the opportunity to these people to teach in the school and remain teacher that, but who will come and replace these teachers? We need to talk about these risks now. Which approaches will we use in order to organize this process? If I still have some time, I want to add some thesis. So for instance, you have still 1.5 minutes, 90 seconds. There are different approaches and they need to be different in the West and in the East because the situation is different, the situation in the community is different, and we need also to take the security of the people that live there. We have to use green energy, also renewables, and also energetic rebuilding. We need a decentralized energy sector, and we just learned how important it is when we are shelled by Russian troops. Also, the next point, when we start rebuilding projects, we need the cooperation between civil society and local government, and also the local communities will develop when they have the most human capital, because so many people have left, but without people, the communities will not work. And when we rebuild the cities, we need to think about this atmosphere that will ensure the uniqueness of the communities. We will not have the community of the miners or different workers. That will be maybe different communities with a new soul or so. And the last, the rebuilding will not be ended in few years. We need to prepare ourselves for this long process where everyone can find the role and to supply his or her energy and motivation in order to rebuild Ukraine in order not to face those aggressors as today. Thank you.
And the last point I want to say, no, no, go on, but yes, we are pressed on time. So Denis Bihunov, Center for Civil Liberties, Drukarnia, your 10 minutes, please.
Доброго дня всім колеги. Я
Oh,
Денис.
dear colleagues, I am Denis Bihunov. I am the director of Civil Society Center Drukarnia in Slovyansk. We are in Ivano-Frankivsk for now, but we still hold the connections to the civil societies and the civil society organizations on the regional level in Donetsk Oblast, but also in other front regions. We try to rebuild the contacts, to hold the contacts, and also to learn about the situation, what happens there in communities, and what problems, what difficulties the people face there, and how we can help them also, or one another as a civil society. When we talk about rebuilding and the early reconstruction of Ukraine, and here I want to note that rebuilding and reconstruction during the war has its own special approaches. Of course, we can develop the strategic action plan, how we shall act after the war, when we have a secure situation. And I think it's the most important point. We need to stabilize situation when we understand where the front line is, then, only then we can plan approaches and actions on the regional and also on the local level. When I talk right now to my colleagues in Slovyansk, Kramatorsk, Svetogirsk, in Pokrovsk, Drushkivka, the situation is pretty complicated and complex. When we talk about the front regions, these regions are, the situation is difficult there. And when we talk about the regions that we have a direct contact, these regions have its own special situations, because the stabilization, the economic or political stabilization, these directions, they can't be effective under circumstances when we don't know where the front line will be. And the most important stabilization actions, it's the regulation, it's external regulation, humanitarian aid. So it's a regulation that aims the problem that just occur in everyday life. For instance, we have damaged infrastructure, but people remain living there. So no one will build in new windows or repair the ceilings of the houses. So these problems that we have are external. So it's about to find intermediate approach to how to repair the houses, how to give food to people, and so on. And these functions are now the local government or the military administration is a closed system, and it works for the defense of the territory. And a lot of stabilization are now lying on the civil society, and it's about also volunteers who take their own cars and doing this work. So bringing food to someone, bringing clothes to someone, prepare something on the house, and so it's a network, and it's information change, and so we and also how Valeriy Novykov already mentioned. So it tries just to hold situation and to repair like all these things. So and it's a condition how we work there, and there are volunteers, but we have also volunteer hubs in Drushkivka, in Kramatorsk, in Sloviansk, in also in Svyatogirsk, where the people are staying, because a lot of houses are ruined in Svyatogirsk, but people are still living there, and also a local government, but also volunteers are working with people, and these volunteers, they need help. So my recommendation is to say, of course we need different regional or strategies on the state level, but we need to support all the volunteer organizations and hubs. They works on the local level. They need a lot of help and support. They need to repair their cars. They need also financing, and also they need psychological help, because these are the people that help other people, so they also get burned out. It is very important to help civil society on the local level. So we now work with these networks. We try also to build networks and to introduce people to one another. There are different problems that we need to address. For instance, we gather some donations, and we sent to 7 really big humanitarian organizations just the possibility to charge their phones and some generators, and so they can communicate in these conditions. So during the war, when we have, and how Valeriy Novikov just mentions, when we don't have functioning local government, these organizations, volunteers can react to all the problems, and they can discuss these problems and to exchange information. That's why the most important recommendation is the support of these volunteer organizations, of these hubs, and also psychological support for these volunteers. We need to organize some forums or maybe some events where they can just rest and recover. For instance, in December, we organized for the volunteer one retreat in Carpathian Mountains, where people could just reflect on the last year and to exchange the information, because we see it in the practice that there are too little communication, because people are just working on the time, but we need to support them, and we need to ensure that they can also exchange information, and we need also help them that they can do their social mission that they have during the year.
Requirements and opportunities. And of course, you and other panelists are the people who can match them, who can make them meet. We have approached the end of the first hour of our work, and this means that we are now opening the floor for questions. However, I don't see any questions so far. Presumably they will come. I have a question to everyone on the panel. Within 1 minute span, please tell me and the others what is the most valuable contribution from other panelists. And Roman Avramenko will start.
Thank you, Andriy. So I think all of us did a great job, everyone in their field of expertise and authorities. I'm really glad and pleased for the colleagues to paint a broader picture of the reconstruction of Ukraine, and not only reconstruction, but construction and brand new, maybe not principle, but brand new approaches to the areas that were affected by the conflict. That we just don't need just to bring it back to the level it has been before the full-scale invasion. We have to think further, not only we, like Ukrainian representatives of Ukrainian civil societies and the state of Ukraine, but also international donors.
Brand new, you say. Speaking of the brands, do they have to be specifically Ukrainian, or we can borrow from the foreign experience? Roman.
I think it should be a mix of the local expertise brought from the grassroots level, from the local communities, and this has to be discussed, because in many cases the representatives of international entities, they act according to the patterns and to the understanding that they have developed according to their own expertise. And that's why I'm glad we're having this webinar that would allow the people in the EU, in other funds and the organizations to amend and adjust the plans according to the actual needs that are presented here on the ground.
Thank you. And we have our first question. It comes from Yulia, and it says, the young adults in the front zone who have no occupation, they were mentioned by Vyacheslav Likhachov. What will be the consequences for them if they are not supported and involved in socio-economic development? Please, Vyacheslav, answer.
Oh, first of all, I meant not young, but in general, working age adults. Consequences could be different. Most likely, they will just leave the region where they don't have real opportunities to feed themselves and to feed their families. And it will undermine all the future efforts for reconstruction of the areas. And the areas will be definitely depopulated. Of course, there are some concerns about probably involvement in some illegal criminal activities or any kind of asocial behavior. I'm not sure about it, but definitely individuals in such social economic circumstances, they are more intent to use alcohol, for example, because it's first of all the social and psychological illness. Those people could be marginalized in social psychological terms, and the society just will lose them. So there are the consequences will be not only for those people personally as an individuals, but for the society and for the future social economic situation in the areas, as for me.
Thank you, Vyacheslav. Anyone wants to chip in and offer their vision of the problem, or use this opportunity to say what you weren't able to say during your presentation? Not, oh yes, Denise, go ahead.
Я хотів би лише підтримати слова В'ячеслава про
I
те,
would
що
like to support Vyacheslav, and indeed the war makes people poorer. The desocialization is growing, and this is unfortunately making a criminal situation harder. And this is also a challenge for stabilization, and it's also very important direction to work on. And local authorities also could and they should work on this, but unfortunately they are understaffed, especially in Donetsk region, and they have no capacity to deal with all the programs, because many women, for example, who worked in social services, they were evacuated, and but the negative impact on society is growing. Also, alcoholism and criminal behavior are growing, and we need to react to that too.
Important and deep-looking one, and requiring expert answers such as you may provide. First, from Sophie Lambroskini, we have a gratitude to everyone who spoke, and 2 questions. I will read them one by one. You mentioned the fact that Ukrainians in occupied areas who worked to ensure the provision of humanitarian needs should not be considered collaborators, if I understood well, she says. Has this interpretation of collaboration been adopted by law or by decree, or is it still under discussion? I think that Roman was speaking about this, so the question goes to you, but then everyone who wants may add something.
Good, thank you, Sophie, for the question. Yes, indeed, you're absolutely right that people who work to ensure the people living on the occupied territories have access to the basic needs and facilities should not to be considered as collaborators, and that is basically enlisted into the rules of war, the international humanitarian law that from one side obliges the occupying power to support and provide all necessary needs and goods to the people living under their control, under the occupation, which is Russia totally fails to achieve. We've been to many settlements that were under the Russian occupation for half a year, and for this long period of time, Russian occupying powers did absolutely nothing to restore the water supply, electricity, heating, food provision, and everything. People living there, they literally lost tens of kilograms of weight because they had nothing to eat. I've interviewed a doctor at the emergency station in a Zoom, and he showed me his picture before the occupation. He was quite a noble man, over 100 kilo of weight. And when I was talking to him, he was really thin and slight, and he lost 30 kilograms just because he had to work to provide medical care to people, and he had nothing to eat under the circumstances. And there is still no guidelines or anything developed for the Ukrainian not authorities, but people who the local authorities elected or appointed and who works in the at local administrations, who work at schools, at the emergency facilities or whatsoever. And that causes really problems of false accusation of them being collaborators. That is the point I was talking about, and that's the issue that one need to concentrate on. And in fact, my relative who lives in New region, and he was also under occupation, he was the head of the village, and he had to be in touch with Russians to make sure the villagers have access to bread, so the car with bread would pass through the Russian checkpoint to deliver bread to the village. And after the occupation, he was questioned by the security service, and he was accused of being a collaborator, and he was really scared. He's lucky he was by the time on the constant contact with authorities in Chernihiv, in the center of the region. They told the security service officers that he wasn't a collaborator, he was just doing his job. And that is something that is very frequent in all the areas that have been occupied. And on the other hand, people who really collaborated, they are left unpunished, and that is an issue that raises the tension inside the communities.
Thank you, Roman. And I see that Valeriy wants to add something. Please go on.
Да, в мене ще такий уточнюючий коментар.
I also have a comment. So Ukrainian legislative, it has a law on collaboration. So what Roman said, that international law, it says that people who are that in international law says that people on occupied territories who provide humanitarian needs. Yes, but in Ukrainian law it says that the collaboration with occupational authorities, it is very broad. You can interpret it in various different ways. And we talk to lawyers who deal with these questions, and they say that theoretically, even people who get a pension from Russian Federation can also be treated as so their actions can also be treated as collaboration because they were getting pension from Russian authorities. And we really have to work on the law.
All the speakers highlighted the enormous role for Ukrainians locally, local authorities, but also recruitment of people that would accept to work in the areas that have suffered extreme damage. Is this situation being somehow discussed at international level or domestically in terms of programs and financing? Whoever knows, please give the answer. Yes, please, Olena. Ms. Zakharova.
We are currently working with the European Commission with a small group of Ukrainian experts, and their aim of this work is to find their window of opportunities and to provide needs assessment of the deoccupied territories and to understand how we can rebuild the social fabric there. But it is on this work is only initial phase, and we are aware about extreme danger of being on these territories, not only by local authorities, but even to provide the needs assessment. We lack experts who can who agree to get to their territories and to conduct the interviews to get the information. But I would say that we are starting this work, and at the moment, for me, it's the only opportunity, the only one initial project with the international partner.
Thank you very much, Olena. From experience, I know that what your organization and you personally start, this usually goes on to a successful completion. And there are two very important questions from Igor Michnik, who is a senior analyst at Mercy Corps. First, in several regions, political tensions started emerging between regional and local authorities, Chernihiv being only the most open case. How is the civil society currently navigating between different local and regional political interests across the country to continue still helping the most in need? Yes, Vyacheslav.
I will try to answer in brief. First question. There are political tensions, kind of competitions, especially in media publicity between mayors of the administrative centers and heads of the military oblast administration, and not only in Chernihiv, but in Kherson as well, and in some other regions. Actually, in terms of civil society involvement in this competition in struggle, civil society, especially humanitarian organizations and volunteer groups which work on the ground, don't have really strong connections, links with the regional level of administration of authorities. And these oblast and mayor cities level administration less involved in humanitarian practical work on the ground. And the civil society actors practically on practical level works mostly with the administrations on a Hromads'ke level or on a level of small settlements, towns, on rayon level as maximum. So civil society actors are not involved in this competition, well, with some exceptions. Of course, there are organizations, volunteers, and local opinion leaders who are involved in such political competition and media conflicts, but generally speaking about civil society actors, they just have nothing to do with these political tensions. About the second issue, I have two brief, well, even not answers, but points important for me on the subject. First of all, I think international donors are overthinking about our corruption. They are obsessed about our corruption. My major advice to the international donors in this on the subject is just to think less about our corruptions. Unfortunately, our corruption often became an excuse for limitation on the direct involvement of the funding and so on, is an excuse for choosing partnership with another international organizations and not going to the Ukrainian national bodies, whatever government or non-governmental. So I think this overthinking about the Ukrainian corruption is as dangerous for the international help as the corruption itself. And the second point, if you want to avoid corruption risks, you need to work directly with the civil society actors. If you don't trust the government, if you don't want to spend your time and your expertise to realize what actually goes on the ground with all this corruption risk. Just don't go to the authorities, go to the civil society actors. They are the most effective and the most trusted actors on the ground. They are natural partners for the international donors in any issues of humanitarian aid and future restructuring of the country, and it is the easiest way to avoid all the corruptional risks, as for me. Over.
Thank you so much, especially for this add-on by the end. As for me, this still leaves some space for other people to voice their opinions. And Mr. Likhachov was referring to the second question from Mr. Michnik. What role can civil society play to prevent corruption risks in early recovery projects or construction projects? And this is something that most donors are currently strongly concerned about. I think that we heard a very deep going and characteristic answer, but if anyone wants to add something, no, not at this point. There's a brief question, but very indicative one from Daniel Zakharova, who writes, where is the desirable middle between the idealistic approach to Ukraine's reconstruction and the real situation on the ground? Which one should prevail in the public discourse? Although I'm not quite sure what Daniel means by idealistic approach to Ukraine's reconstruction, because this can be interpreted in several ways. But the real situation on the ground, I think, is understandable to all. So who wants to answer? Where is the desirable middle between the idealistic approach and the real situation on the ground? I see that Olena is prepared to comment. And Valeriy after Olena.
Frankly speaking, it's very difficult to answer me this question because I do not know what the author mean by idealistic approach.
Then speak of real situation.
If he provides some points, what does it mean? I will try to answer this question.
Okay, meanwhile, I'll try to reformulate. Do we have to present the real situation in all its diversity and sometimes a very unhappy situation also precluding some positive tendencies? Or shall we say, okay, we shall overcome, we shall wait a bit more? Remember March last year, the war will end in a couple of months, and so on. So which tone do we choose in talking to ourselves and to the outside world?
I think we need to create the principles and criteria, and maybe they would be idealistic and difficult to approach, but we need to struggle to approach them as close as it is possible. It is the same issue with the European integration. When 10 years ago we spoke about it, it seems for us some idealistic issue, but we consistently worked on it. The same with the reconstruction and its principles. It's like, for example, like building communism. You never reach it, but you are constantly trying to go this way, or to hold the direction on that way. And then we will find in the process where this golden middle.
Thank you very much. As a person among you who has probably done more, also because of my age and the time when I lived to try to build communism, I can fully share your assessment. Valeriy, Valeriy, and then Roman.
І нам не потрібно гадати, коли закінчиться
We
війна.
don't need to think about when the war will end. We have to go in this direction. What we need now, we need now the minimum standards that we need for the life in the deoccupied territories. Without this, and of course, it's not ideal. We can't build castles and new fabrics, but minimal conditions in order to people to come back. At the same time, we need to build some points, some pilot projects in some chosen communities where we can show that there are new perspectives so that we can also grow in the communities that will do the work and that we will able to conduct such projects. And I think this is the direction for the Ukraine in the reconstruction. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valeriy, and then Roman, and then Denis.
I would say answering Daniel's question about the desirable middle is that Russians would back off and leave us alone, and that would be the desirable middle. And Ukrainians will do all the rest of the job. We've been to Kyiv region, the whole settlements were totally destructed or very, very severely damaged. And when we've been there already in May, there were plenty of signs we are reopened. So Ukrainians took the handled the issues, and they took everything in their hands, and they rebuilt, reconstructed, and reopened the facilities. I know a guy who's from Zaporizhia region who now lives in Berlin, and he only knows how to plant and grow tomatoes. And his only desire is to continue planting and growing tomatoes in his homeland, in Zaporizhia region. Just Russians back off, he will come back and he will continue to plant, grow, chop, and sell the best tomatoes in the world.
Thank you, Denis.
Дякую. Стосовно питання про
Thank
ідеалістичне
you. About the question about the idealistic reconstruction or real situation with the difference or with the desirable middle, I would say that when we talk about reconstruction, we have to consider also security situation, how to rebuild the strong system of security and defense systems. When we also build new houses, we need to understand, do we have for this house maybe some tank that can also defend this house? We need guarantees for our rebuilding. So it's important to have this realistic discussion. This rebuilding will be only then effective if it will be secured by this question of the security sector and defense sector.
Comes from Euro from the Université Paris-Nanterre, and I think it is caused, at least in part, but what we heard from Vyacheslav. Dear panelists, first of all, thanks a lot for your insightful presentations. My question is for all of you. What kind of mechanisms would you, in order to facilitate the direct relation between donors and civil society organizations and avoid the shortcomings you have described? Slav should start, as I feel that it was him who sort of provoked this question.
I think so, but it is not easy to. It is much more easy to point the problem or the challenge than to offer the mechanisms of how to deal with it. But the simple answer is, if you want to build the links, you should build the links. If you want to have a connection with the civil society actors, you need to communicate with them. Of course, there are some existing platforms and space to do it, and we are now on one of the most important of them. There are a lot of space to create new platforms of the communication. But first of all, as for me, the most important thing is intention. And the international donors need to understand that they need to build such a communication. It is not a secret that there are a lot of working meetings and conferences about humanitarian aid for Ukraine, where we have 30, 40, 50 participants from international organizations and 1, 2, 3, 5 participants from Ukraine, and their voices are not the most important and respectful for the gathering. We have donors which operated large amount for humanitarian aid, which works with a special expert needs assessment groups or organizations as well abroad, or not the Ukrainian ones, to give them an understanding of the needs of Ukrainian population. And it is not the one separate example, it's a trend. The international organizations need to understand that they need help of the Ukrainian civil society to be more effective in the Ukrainian situation. And moreover, they need to understand that their cooperation with the Ukrainian civil society is a kind of investment to the Ukrainian stability, to the Ukrainian sustainable development in the future itself, because it will lead to the strengthening of the capacity of the Ukrainian civil society, which will lead to less corruptional risks and so on. But first of all, the most important thing is their understanding, and I'm not ready to offer the concrete mechanisms or platforms, but I believe that it is not only possible, but more or less easy to create them if the donors will understand that they need it. Over.
Thank you very much. I've seen that Olena Zakharova raised her hand, but then she lowered it for some reason. So as Valeriy Novykov has not lowered his hand, he now has the word. But if Olena wants, she can raise her hand again.
Я хочу додати таку ложку дьогтю до нашої
I
громадської.
would like to add some bitterness to our beautiful civil society bubble. We are in a bubble and we think that we know everything and we understand everything. But I think that the dialogue among us is important and needed, but it's not enough. We need to create different formats of dialogues between different stakeholders. So we have our dialogue, then there is a dialogue on the level of local authorities, and we need to combine them. We need to also add into this dialogue the representatives of Ukrainian on the level of the Ukrainian government, and we have to discuss our views on one and the same problem. Yesterday, I met the representatives of Ukrainian government. It was Mustafa Nayem, renovation, who work on renovation and restoring of Ukraine. But they will work only in 10 different regions, and their work is only to rebuild what was ruined, and they don't have a vision for the future. So actually, until we met with them, we didn't know what their vision is, and we couldn't plan our collaboration with them accordingly.
Thank you very much, Olena.
I just wanted to not to add, because the previous speakers mentioned it, but to wrap it and to provide the recipe how to do it. The first is we need to provide mapping of civil organizations and governmental institutions that are dealing in this sphere. The second, to make need assessments of this organization, of the people on the ground. And the third, to build different dialogue platforms between these actors. I understand that it is rather simple, yes, recipe, but I believe that only with the help of international donors we can build these big dialogue structures of communication between different actors, and we will be grateful for this help.
Thank you very much. A very important and far-reaching question comes from Avramenko, and it is, it seems to have vanished. But I remember the question. It was about that the writer heard the recommendation about corruption, or rather fighting corruption, or whatever. And the question was, what other recommendations would you make to international community in respect of participating in the reconstruction of Ukraine? I find it in another slot. So thank you for your respective presentations. I did hear the recommendation on corruption. What would be the other recommendations to the international donors for the months and years to come? And I will ask every participant to give just one recommendation that they think is the most important at the moment. And Denis Bihunov will start this time, then Vyacheslav, and then the others.
Дякую. Я би відповів на це питання так, що...
Thank you. I would like to answer this question as follows. The main investment, from my point of view, is it's very important to give an institutional support for civil organizations, because now in the times of war, civil organizations are the most universal and independent players, actors, who can provide independent assessment and act independently. So during the economic crisis and growth of poverty and migration, when civil organizations don't manage to survive as a structure, to renew these structures, it will be very, very difficult. So I think it's very important to keep this potential and to keep these organizations alive.
Дякую. Вячеслав, будь ласка.
Vyacheslav.
Only one advice: diversify planning timelines. There are at least 3 levels of horizon in our case, which are actual. On the first level, you need to help the population which was affected by the hostilities to find their basic living needs. It's a kind of humanitarian short-term timeline. The second mid-term planning is assessment of needs and reconstruction of damaged and destructed infrastructure, industrial, agricultural, just road infrastructure, demining, of course, those security issues, and the most necessary rebuilding in the strong terms. And the long term of planning is this creation picture of future nature of economic and social landscape in the areas we are talking about, which will be not satisfied in a year or two, but we need to think in terms of 5, 10, 15 years. This level is the most ambitious one, and it is where we're talking about idealistic picture, but we really have to think about long-term perspective in idealistic terms, because we just have no real opportunity to rebuild the situation as it was. It's just impossible. So we need to think what we have to improve to make step forward for our society, for our economics. Over.
Thank you, Vyacheslav. Valeriy.
Одна рекомендація – це
One
посилення
recommendation is to empower existing democratic institutions in Ukraine, because no war in no country actually aids democracy. So, and certain risks evolve, also corruption risks. And democratic institutions, the local and regional democratic institutions, civil society, and power, they will also help the better rebuilding.
I have one remark on behalf of the grassroots level organizations, and I would like to make aware the international donors that when you're working with such kind of organization, be aware that they are unable to work with answering all the provisions that international organization developed and providing all the reports, and sometimes in English language, that it is rather difficult at the local level. And I would recommend to the international donors to rethink their work with local grassroots level organizations, how to facilitate this work and to make possible to reach those who work on the ground and provide a large scale of work. And very often this work is invisible and unsupported.
Thank you, Olena and Roman.
I would say with one phrase: provide loans for establishing small business enterprises, and Ukrainians will do the rest, and they will implement the best practices even better than in many other countries, as we've proven already many times.
Thank you very much. And Roman has answered in typing the next question. And because he has answered the question and hit the button done, the question has disappeared. But luckily, I have read it and I remembered it. I can only speculate why Roman preferred to remove the question from the panel, but maybe we have some.
It was done automatically, Andriy. I didn't. I didn't mean to hide it from the others.
But the question is significant and practical. It comes from Daniel Zakharova again, and he quotes the famous remark by Henry Kissinger, but rephrases it: whom shall you call first when trying to talk to civil society in Ukraine? Roman, have you put your number there?
Yeah, that's my personal number. They can call me absolutely, and I will then distribute the needs among our colleagues. So we've got several coalitions, like Ukraine 5 AM coalition. They are gathered around the accountability for international crimes, and you can reach them directly or via me. And it is involved like some 30 Ukrainian NGOs. There is another initiative called Tribunal for Putin that gathered around 23 NGOs. And, yeah, you can reach them, but it really depends on the type of question you have.
Understood. Understood.
There's no
anyone wants to? Yes, Olena, please.
If it is the answer for Henry Kissinger, as he is a US citizen, I would recommend him to contact, for example, US Embassy or USAID, which are working in Ukraine and have a lot of contacts with civil society organizations, and to make a convention where to make a meeting with Henry Kissinger, and he had an opportunity to communicate with them. If you are from Germany, you also can contact German embassy or in Ukraine, or some other big German organizations who are working for years in Ukraine and have these contacts, and they are aware about different platforms, different organizations, and they have their pool of civil society organizations, and in this way you can communicate with civil society.
And what Olena said reminds me of other very important civil society organizations, but not in Ukraine. Like, for instance, what would you say to the idea that if you are in America, in the USA, you should call Razom for Ukraine? If you are in Germany, you should call CivilMPlus. If you are in Czech Republic, then Člověk v tísni, and all those very, very important organizations and people. That's just a suggestion that we should not forget about every opportunity, as was, by the way, underlined by many of you who spoke here. I think we have exhausted the questions, but I'm sure we have not exhausted the answers and suggestions on your part. So, as we are approaching the end of the time we set for our seminar, I would like to offer you another opportunity to speak for a minute each, either reiterating the most important point from you have already said, or adding to what you have already said, what you haven't said for some reason. And if this is accepted and you have no other choice, of course, we'll start with Denis Bihunov. Now we'll go in, oh no, with Roman Avramenko, we'll go in alphabetical order.
As we have a couple of minutes left, I would be really brief and will sum up maybe my points, and I will just make them bullet points. So my points were deoccupy, demine, bring back to normal psychological conditions, handle with the collaboration, let's say, issue, and provide loans and give the rest to Ukrainians.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Denis Bihunov, your turn.
Дякую. Ну, я би підсумував загалом те, що
To sum up, I would like to say just briefly, we can't see the stabilization without the security and and defense system, and also security and defense system can't regard it without rebuilding, because these moments are very dependent on each other. Now, during the war, there are some things we need to do, and it's support of civil society, because civil society mirrors the state of the society which we now see in this war state of the country, and also communication, a lot of communication. We need to develop communication through different forums. We need to exchange information. That's from me. Thank you.
Humanitarian aid is not a substitute for military aid. To work on reconstruction of the liberated territories, we need to liberate territories. What are we talking about is something extra which will be relevant after the Ukrainian victory. It's maybe the most important issue I have to say.
Thank you very much. Very frank, very down to earth, and very logical. Valeriy Novykov.
В Україні наразі проживає менше, за різними
In
даними,
Ukraine, there are living circa 30 million people, and also the birth rate lowers and the death rate raises. The danger of war don't motivate the people to stay in Ukraine. When the border will open, that part of the people, number of people will possibly leave Ukraine. And when there are a decision to support Ukraine, to rebuild Ukraine, we need to consider that all these measures have to help Ukrainians to live in Ukraine, to stay in Ukraine, to help those people, the internal displaced people, to help them to integrate themselves, to find a new job, to get a proper education in Ukraine. All these measures have to aim that the Ukraine remains really strong human capital in the country, and that we don't lose people who will go to other different.
I will say the same as the previous speakers, but in other words. The first, we need to focus on building not just peace, but sustainable peace, meaning that what we build would prevent the new conflicts in the future and new war. And the second, we need to have a people-centered approach and to focus on restoring social fabric, as people are the main asset. And we should be aware of it, and it should be one of the main principles of rebuilding.
Dear panelists, thank you very, very much. I'm absolutely positive that on the basis what you have said and stated in such clear terms, and you were not withholding your feelings as well, you were instrumental for our other participants in the seminar to better understand the situation in Ukraine, the needs and requirements, and the ways to improve and work further with this situation. Dear CivilMPlus, thank you very much for organizing this seminar and giving me an opportunity to listen to people to whom I usually listen one by one, but when they are on one screen, it's an amazing feeling, and it is important. Thank you, the audience, for posing relevant questions and having patience not only to listen to them, but also to react to the answers, which is always a very good sign. Thank you, Ms. Interpreter, for being with us for almost 2 hours. And again, as I said, I'm an interpreter myself, And I know that this is a beautiful but very exacting job. So I hope that you are as brisk and eloquent now as you were in the beginning of our meeting when I took a liberty to listen to your beautiful translation for a couple of minutes. And I hope that we will, in this form or otherwise, meet again and be able to implement many of the ideas that were voiced or suggested today. Будемо жити, будемо
We will
співпрацювати.
live, we will walk together. Glory to Ukraine.
І всім сталого
And I wish you all sustainable peace after our victory.
Героям слава.